On September 10th, 1972, I gave birth to a baby girl. She was beautiful and healthy, and there was no reason to expect anything other than a bright and happy future for her. We lived with my mom and dad and my little sister Amy. I named my baby Jane Frances after my favorite nun in boarding school, where we visited often. 2 years later, I moved to Michigan and married my first husband, who had been married before. Jane was blessed with a stepbrother and 3 stepsisters. 1 year later, I gave her a baby brother, Sonny, and she was on top of the world. Altogether, there were 6 children. Growing up, Jane loved school, Girl Scouts, school plays, slumber parties, and her family. She was always laughing and telling jokes, and although she couldn't carry a tune, she would belt out a song whenever she felt like singing. Jane went through all the normal rites of passage with grace and humor. When my youngest stepdaughter turned 18, my husband and I divorced. I sent Jane to St. John's Lutheran Junior High, where she made tons of friends and blossomed into a beautiful young teenager. She was thrown into culture shock when she arrived at her new high school and was made aware of the bullying mentality that existed there. Jane's kind and compassionate heart immediately embraced and defended the underdogs at the school. This only made a target out of Jane, and she was bullied and beaten by a few of her classmates. I took Jane out of her school and placed her in a school where her needs would be better met. Jane graduated at the top of her class in 1990 and was the valedictorian. Sadly, it wasn't long after this time that Jane and I realized she had become the host of an insidious, uninvited guest. There had been no reason to assume that Jane would share the same affliction as her grandmother. My mother had suffered with late-onset bipolar disorder. At first, we thought it was typical teenage moodiness. Jane's signs and symptoms became increasingly intense and frequent, and she began seeing a therapist. When Jane was in her early 20s, I received a call from one of her girlfriends telling me that Jane was saying bizarre things and was in danger of harming herself. For the safety of my child, and at the urging of her therapist, I had her immediately taken to St. John's Hospital. Seeing her confused and taken away against her will was perhaps one of the most painful experiences I had ever encountered. A few days later, after she was admitted, my worst fear was confirmed. Jane had the same severe, persistent mental illness diagnosis as my mother. Jane was released from the hospital, seemed to do well, and returned to her independent life, living on her own. She was an accomplished makeup artist for Revlon, Lancome, and Christian Dior. When Jane turned 28, I married my present husband, Jim Pike, who had 4 daughters and a son. Now Jane had 6 more people that she had to share me with. Over the course of the next 10 years, Jane embarked on her own road to wellness. The most difficult bump in the road was her ups and downs, especially her depression. Our relationship became even closer than mother-daughter and better than best friends. At her first NAMI walk, Jane was overwhelmed, sat down, and cried, and said, "I didn't know that so many people cared about me." She really thought we were alone in this mental health battle before NAMI entered our lives. She made amazing progress, but there were several unfortunate detours. Jane did form long and permanent friendships with broken people who admired her ability to make them feel whole and special. These predators convinced her to stop taking her medication and steered her into drug use. Although she periodically succumbed to short episodes of drug use over several years, she never lost her moral compass. She never adopted a drug culture lifestyle. When Jane's life got out of control, she recognized it herself. She had the courage to take responsibility and check herself into the hospital. Although worry was a constant in my life, I never had to take charge of her hospitalization again. She often called on my older brother Rex for guidance, phoned my sisters Anne and Amy when she was lonely, and my brother Jay for some playful teasing. In April 2011, Jane fell headfirst down a flight of cement stairs, damaging her C4, 5, 6, and 7th discs. She refused the necessary surgery because of an unrealistic fear that she would become paralyzed. This event caused her to reevaluate her life. She stopped smoking, quit doing drugs, and eliminated all destructive relationships. She got more rest, better nutrition, and things began to look up for her. She tried physical therapy and medication, but the pain from her accident and the specter of surgery was always there. On one of her winter visits to Florida, we made plans for Jane to move to her own apartment in Naples. She visited NAMI Collier and had hopes of volunteering at the Sarah Ann Drop-In Center. For the first time in a very long time, she saw a light at the end of the tunnel, but she was still in physical pain. 1 year after her stairway fall, on Memorial Day 2012, Jane was in a serious auto accident. Her car was totaled and her nerves in both arms and hands were damaged. The neurologist insisted that Jane have back surgery right away, but once again she refused. She was only willing to do physical therapy. Jane's depression did return with a vengeance. Over the next 2 weeks, Jane cleaned out her closet and dresser drawers, emptied her storage bins, and gave her non-essential items to St. Vincent de Paul. She called everyone she knew just to say she loved them. No one knew that she was actually saying goodbye. On Friday, June 15, 2012, Jane ended her life. She left 2 suicide notes. The first was instructional, the second one was a love note. It simply said, "I love you, Mommy, but I love me too." This was confirmation that she had won her battle over her past life choices, but did not have enough fighting power left to fight the mental illness while adding such debilitating pain to the battlefield. Jane hoped to help others struggling with mental illness, but her dream to help others was cut short. We all need to continue Jane's dream. People struggling with mental illness need you to care about them. This is a war, not a battle, and it will take thousands of foot soldiers to win it. NAMI's successful work in leading this fight needs funding. Please be generous with your donation today. Not only may you change a life, but you may also save one.